Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Renaissance Room podcast, and happy Thursday. My YouTube channel is filled with a bunch of podcast videos, and so I hope you guys are tuning in and listening. I know how cringe it can be to listen to something on YouTube, so I hope you guys have YouTube Premium. This is not an ad, but I'm just thinking about ways to make your listening experience a little bit more enjoyable. So anyway, today's episode, I wanted to kind of come on and talk about life. I always want to come on and talk about life, right? We talk about documenting culture. You talk about trends and just kind of where we are in terms of like conversations and, things that kind of run rampant, right? And so I think I spoke about this in a previous episode, just how being critical or, rather criticizing someone or something does not necessarily mean that you are a critical thinker, right? I actually argue that most people who come online and they come from this critical standpoint and they try to do it under the guise of intellectualism, whether that is them posturing to be more conservative or educated or whatever the case may be, they are not often fostering any level of critical thinking. Because I do think in order to think critically about something, I do think there's some element of compassion in there. I think there's some element of, and maybe if you don't want to say compassion or empathy, there has to be some element of real world experience, right? And what I mean by that is that in order to think critically about something, you have to kind of take it in layers, right? We talk about critical thinking. It's the ability to kind of connect the dots and to look across a diverse body of knowledge from arts to science to, all these different things, and to essentially formulate an opinion or theorize about an idea or a concept or some type of cultural trend or whatever. And most people just aren't doing that, right? Most people are taking videos online, they're reacting, they are really hunching and biting down on stereotypes, not really considering the fact that these stereotypes, directly harm them, right? And when they go out into the world outside of their little small corners on the internet where they're critiquing particular cultures and behaviors and things like that of the culture's degenerates, right? And let me not say degenerates, because that's what we're going to be talking about today. When they're critiquing certain outliers, rather, they fail to realize that when they go out into the world by and large, and more specifically, I'm talking about Black people, okay? People are going to see them in that light anyway, right? We fail to realize that when you listen to a lot of these very ignorant podcasters and commentators who critique Black culture and, the ways of our relationships and dating and the aftermath of certain decisions or whatever, they fail to realize that when we go out into the world, right? When you get off that podcast, you shut that camera off, you go to the grocery store, you drive down, like you're still a nigga. You know what I mean? Like you're still a nigga. You're still that in the minds of a vast majority of Americans, right? We're living in a white supremacist society, and regardless of where you go, everyone has a bad taste in their mouth in regards to African Americans, and it was designed that way, right? Whether it's the immigrant, whether it's the white American, like obviously it's the white American, but and I don't say that matter of factly, right? I definitely I was actually listening to Pastor Darby this morning, and he spoke about white supremacy. And, you really grieve that there are no ministries that actually educate Black people, right? There's no level of education. You could really tell that he was someone who actually read his Bible and had real application, real understanding, right? One of the things that I found to be very prevalent within the Black church is that there is a literacy issue, right? That literacy issue that permeates public schools is the same thing that permeates the pulpit, right? So you have a lot of people, pastors, teachers, persons of influence, right? And entire congregation even, who doesn't necessarily understand biblical text, right? And it makes sense. I mean, if you're someone who is reading at a 5th grade, 3rd grade level, 6th grade level, even 7th grade level, right? There's no way you can really sit and interpret this very ancient text that is written, right? And I don't even know I don't know what, I actually, my words are failing me. I don't actually know what text it is. I don't want to say it's scripted, but in part it is, right? We know within the Bible, there's parables, there's different meanings to different things. And I don't want to say it, I'm just going to say, for lack of better words, it's an ancient text. I don't know. I wasn't going to say Hebrew because obviously, some of it is in Hebrew, but for the most part, it's been translated over 1 million times. So, anyway, I say all that to say it's going to be really hard to read the King James Version and actually understand and apply any of this when you are reading on a 6th grade level, right? You're talking about like reading Shakespeare Shakespeare or reading, you know what I mean? Like just reading something very like challenging, right? It's very challenging material. And if you already are struggling with, just basic reading skills or whatever, then you're not really, you have to really build up a sense of literacy and practice, right? And to really be able to understand the Bible. So that's all I was saying. Anyway, I was just coming on today because I wanted to just kind of talk about, obviously I spoke about this in a previous podcast, but just to reiterate, we're living in a day and time where you are really seeing the highlights of youth culture, right? A lot of people who are young are at the forefront of our media, right? They are the ones who are typically pushing the narratives on the platforms. They are the one, it's creative, it's fun, it's innovative, it's all these things. But the downside of that is that you have a bunch of people who are afraid to live. You have a bunch of people who have no experience in life. You have a bunch of people who don't quite really understand, what is taking place within the African American community by and large, right? People know bits and pieces. I think we all kind of know generally bits and pieces, but at the same time, some of us know a little bit more than others, right? And in knowing that, we do have a little bit more compassion or at least understanding with how we engage with cultural context today, right? Most people who don't have that, and you'll always kind of see, they really kind of come from a very hateful and dismissive and very like cruel standpoint, right? And so inevitably, to be an African American, you are going to make mistakes, right? I really should have made a video about this, and I might still make a video, but inevitably being an African American, you are going to make mistakes. And the reason why you're going to make mistakes is because you don't have a roadmap, right? You are either a first gen, right? You are the first gen, even in you talk about Gen Z, being able to be privy to certain information, right? I don't think people realize what it was for African Americans to be denied the right to read books, right? To read books, to educate ourselves. Like, I don't think that we can even fathom that, right? We can't fathom the fact that like we literally were denied the right to be educated, right? And so we are the first generation of people who actually have this level of access, right? Even when you start talking about being a first generation college graduate student, everyone's not getting the same opportunities at the university, and that's for a myriad of reasons. I'm going to make a different video about this. And so even though now we have been given access, right? And if you look at it from a historical context, this has always been exactly this, right? So we were emancipated from slavery, and we were just thrown out into the world. And, there were laws in place. White people were incredibly racist, hateful. You could be lynched for walking on the wrong side of the road. It was pretty much their word against ours. The laws didn't protect us, right? And you were just thrown out into the world, right? There was no knowledge on anything that has, no knowledge on how to conduct yourself in modern civilization, right? You have been enslaved, and now you're free, and you're just thrown out in the world, right? And so fast forward to today, that's pretty much what it is when America really grants any sense of liberty, right, in regards to the humanizing of Black people, right? We get these freedoms, but we're never really given the tools or the resources on how to steward or how to really be guided in these ways, right? So now here it is, you have access to college by and large. Sure, you have access to college, right? But at the same time, now, there's other barriers, right? There's mental barriers, right? You grow up in a public school. Like, these are all the things. And so same thing, fast forward, you start talking about relationships, right? We know that Black people, our relational dynamics have always been at the forefront of everything, right? It's always been at the forefront. It's always been the thing that people want to talk about. And so fast forward, you have a lot of people today who are really wanting to take a chance on what is called the nuclear family, right? A lot of people are like, hey, I want to take a chance on this, and rightfully so, right? Rightfully so. It's a beautiful thing, right? But at the same time, right? At the same time, you have a bunch of people who've never seen this take place in their real lives, right? Very few in between that have people actually seen married families. And, you see people who are married, right? Even if their parents were married, their parents are now divorced, right? They waited till the kids were older. And so Black people always get like a double whammy, like there's like a double portion, double slap of the shame whenever our relationships go sour. But as I've learned, and as I've been able to be privy to other cultures, right, through online anonymous forums and things like that, it wasn't a black thing. You know what I mean? It wasn't a black thing, but our cruelty towards one another. Now that was something that was definitely systemic, and that was something that was very pervasive within our culture here within the white supremacist society such as America, right? The way we handle mistakes for Black people is just not the same. A very general example would be, whenever there's a white teenager who is, convicted of hazing and someone gets harmed or whatever, it's boys will be boys, right? It's boys will be boys. He didn't really mean it like that, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas it's a Black student, right, who under the same, convictions, it's like, he's a criminal, he's a monster, right? And we do this in every single regard, right? In regards to Black people. And so I think when we don't have an understanding of how white supremacy works, especially today, right? Because white supremacy is something we no longer talk about. I would actually argue that white conservatism, right? Christian nationalism, all of these things have really taken the forefront. And I think if you don't have any type of psychological rooting in Black history, in Black studies, in America's, history in general, right? What has taken place over the years, what is still taking place over the years, then all you can do is internalize it and hate yourself. And if the answer, right, that politicians, that teachers, that those who are in positions of power are giving you to the solution to your problems as a Black person who may be uneducated in regards to African American history, the solution that they give you is to be more white, right? If you would just be more like us, right? Come to our church, right? Don't go off and do your Negro gospel. Like, come here, let us talk about forgiveness and how you need to forgive me when I'm in the church and I'm being racist. Like, if you just don't have an awareness of what has taken place, and you don't have an awareness of how to show up in the world and conduct yourself in a different way, and how to really hold your own, then you're absolutely going to begin to contort yourself. And because of course, right, because of white supremacy, because of the foundations, because of the entire origin and the entire premise of whiteness, right, it is the sanctification of whiteness, upholding the sanctification of whiteness, right? That's all it is to be a white person. And what that really looks like is just preserve whiteness, preserve its image, right? That's why when Charlie Kirk was murdered, we didn't look at what is taking place within white America and why this white man felt so privileged. Same thing with the guy, Luigi. I think he might have been white enough, right? White enough. You know what I mean? All right. But we didn't look at it, and we didn't say, what is it about white privilege that makes them so entitled to kill someone, right? What is it about that, right? You even look at who has access to the type of guns and to the guns and the crimes and all these different things. We didn't look at it like that. But when it's a Black person, right? When it's a Black person, we're going knee deep. We're going knee deep. Here comes the empathy. Here comes the personalization, right? Here comes the scrutiny of the entire culture, right? But when it's Charlie Kirk, it's like, hey, he died. We don't look at, wait a minute, this was a complete murder, right? Absolutely murdered, right? Straight up homicide, right? Like, this is crazy. But that's white privilege, right? White people get the privilege of killing one another and still not really being seen as the bad guy, right? People didn't even focus on what has taken place. They didn't focus on the evil that had just been taking place. What they focused on, Charlie Kirk, preserving whiteness, right? He was a good man. He was a Christian. You see what I'm saying? So understand that. And so you can very clearly see, you don't even have to be a historian. You don't even need to crack open a history book to see the stark difference in how, fast forward to today, and how all of these different aspects of our lives are connected, into how there's this very stark contrast in how white Americans are viewed in terms of their mistakes versus Black Americans. And I've spoken about this before with single mothers, with divorced women, right? White women do not get this same level of scrutiny, right? It's, oh, she's a mom. She's a mom, y'all. She's a mom. Right? You could say, well, yeah, they do. And in part, yeah, sure, they do. There are some differences when you start talking about relationally, but even still, that is viewed in a different way, right? Her husband's just having a hard time right now in life at work, and he's got his issues and blah, blah, blah. But the black man is a demon. He's demonic. He needs to be delivered. He is a cruel person, and he's the one who's really struggling economically, and I'm not justifying anything. I'm not justifying bad behavior. I'm not justifying abuse. I'm not justifying I'm just telling you, let's just take a look at how we treat one another, how we view one another, especially when in terms of just our humanity. Right. And so this is the dehumanization of African American people, which is the premise of white supremacy, which is the premise of this entire nation, this entire country. I'm sorry. That's what we do to black people. Right. That's what we do to black people. So then we wonder why we're angry, and we wonder why, it's just all varies. I think black people have a very unique relationship with anger, because I think of so much that happens to us. Right. There's so much oppression, so much, suppression of our emotions, all the things that take place internally, because there's nowhere for it to go. Who are you going to get mad at? You ain't going to go down and get mad at the judge. You ain't going to go down there and take it out on the person. You're not going to take it out on your oppressor. And today, right, people don't even want to hear about it. People don't want to hear about it. I just made a post on there talking about, what I quoted Stephen Darby, your oppressor does not want to hear about how you're being oppressed. That's why the algorithm will push it far down below. That's why a lot of these young kids today are all about, multiculturalism, all about multiracial, all about just pretty much letting go of anything that is, racially, I don't even want to say, what do I want to say? I don't want to say racially motivated, because that's not where I was going. But anything that is any education in regards to Black history, people are willing to forego it. People want to live in their little pods. Everyone's, psychologists and sociologists, what's going on with the isolation? What's going on with the isolation is that people are living in their own little pods because people can no longer deal with the realities of life. Right? And the meta comes in, and here is a solution for people who cannot cope with life. Here is a solution for people who cannot sit with the truth and still dream with their eyes wide open. Let's put a phone in front of them. Let's give them devices. Let's give them a virtual reality. Let's do all these things, because you literally cannot cope with life. It's not a boy crisis. People are mentally inept. You get older, and you should be able to manage, or, at least deal with some type of mental, have some type of mental endurance, have some type of fortitude. People don't have that anymore. You see what I'm saying? Completely weakened, completely broken. Right. And so here we are. That's where we are today. And so we don't have the cognitive flexibility because we haven't had the experience. Right. And so if we have a little bit more privilege than the other African Americans, we want to distinguish ourselves and say, hey, listen, right, because that's what we've been doing for years. That's another thing. If you didn't know, right, there's always been a class of African Americans who have sought to distinguish themselves from other African Americans who have just been less privileged, less access. Right. And it's to say, hey, I am not like them. Right. Please let me in. I can be in the community. I can go. Please let me in. Let me get, and so that's what you see today, right? Because it's very evident, you talk about the have and the have nots. You start talking about cultural differences. You start talking about the political divide that has always been there, but it's very prevalent today with this administration, right? And so people need to find a way out. People need to find a leg up. People need to, people are positioning themselves to say, hey, listen, not me. Choose me. Let me be free. Let me be the one who can have the access to do, you know what I'm saying? And so obviously you're not going to be granted that access because it wasn't designed for you to be that way, but you don't know that. So you start fighting the people within your community. You become the overseer. You become the one that said, get in line. Right. And even in our attempts to educate others about mistakes, whether it's relational mistakes with women in reproductivity, it's always going to be a wagging of the finger. There's always going to be this element of shame. And that's typically why I do believe that there's always going to be this level of like anger that accompanies us, right? It shows up in very sinister and insidious ways, right? The Black woman who's sitting online telling you, all in the name of mentorship, do this with your body, do that with your body, is angry. right? The undertone, the spirit behind it is anger, right? She's using shame as a motivator. And it's really because, in her own life, she has fallen short. Right. And not because there's anything wrong with her, but because that is just what it is to be an African American. And I think the older that you get, the wiser that you should get, at least. And you should be able to reckon with the realities. Right. It's not to say that anything is not possible, but it is to say, hey, listen, this is a very long journey for all of us. And I think that's such a hard reality for a generation of people who do not have mental fortitude, right? They don't know what it is, we talk about civil rights and things like that. They don't really understand the magnitude of our plight as African Americans. They don't know why we do the work we do. They don't know what it is to carry the cross of advocacy for Black people. And so the solution is to let me stand over here. Right. Maybe I had a little bit of straight and narrow, even though, you may have had multiple degrees, but what university did you go to? Is that university even still open today? Right. Like even still. Right. And I'm saying that to say like, you were still impacted by these barriers. Right. Like, so it's becoming easier and easier for us to turn on one another. Right. That's what anger does. Right. For many African American people, there's really nowhere for it to go. You see what I'm saying? And so I just think that we were entering a very interesting time. And I think we were so far removed from reality. I think that's why you have so many people who are quite literally giving up on life, whether it's the murdering of their children, whether it's their partners, like, you're really seeing this level of violence. I think it's always kind of been enacted, but I do think, I would actually argue that it's a little bit more widespread today. Although possibly undocumented, right? And maybe if it's not necessarily as serious as like, like death, it's in these very insidious ways. It could be it's the verbal, right? The verbal hate that we spew online, right? So I'm going to go because this has been a very long podcast episode and I need to get ready for my day. But I just wanted to come on here and say that. And I guess, my message for anybody who has made mistakes and who has lived a very imperfect life and who has been a victim to their environment in the sense that they just didn't have the resources or whatever, keep pressing, keep living your life. I think for one of the things I would say to, again, anybody who's in that space, not everybody deserves to hear your story. There used to kind of be this thing where as Black people, we would go on these shows or these platforms and we would talk about the ghetto and we would try to sell a hard knock life story. Today, people aren't doing that, right? People want to be seen as more polished, right? People are aware of the class barriers and not necessarily barriers, but more so the benefits of being of a certain class. So people are really wanting to portray themselves as something else. So we have detached ourselves from the struggle and we all want a little bit of that privilege and we'll go about it in any way, whether that's boasting about our little marriages. And I mean, not say little, marriage is a beautiful thing. But I'm saying you're seeing these women weaponize these things, whether it's femininity, whether it's the way our hair curls, whether it's our skin, like you're really seeing people, Black people specifically, start to really commodify and capitalize off of their privileges, right? Compared to maybe the majority of African American people who do not have these privileges. And so if you are someone who has a very real life, and you notice how I didn't want to use the word imperfect. If you are someone who has a real life, be very mindful of what you share with other people. Not everybody deserves to hear your story. Not everybody is rooting for you. Not everybody deserves to, not everybody deserves to really hear about what has taken place and what your journey has been, and that's one thing I'm realizing. I think sometimes it's easy to get online in the name of community and with the intention to inspire and motivate people. But I would just argue, the wisdom of the Bible, guard your heart. You know what I mean? Not everybody deserves to know how you got here and how you've managed, you know what I mean? Like I said, so many people are so far removed from reality. And you will see this with people who even live these very narrow and linear lives, right? Persons who are of privilege, right? They start to really kind of craft these very fantasies that will never come true, and when they're met with reality, it's a very hard pill to swallow. And that's why I say anger is the companion of a lot of African American people, right? Because even if you've done all the things the right way, and you are educated. This goes for men and women, because I've seen it on both sides in my real life, right? You have the advanced degrees, men and women, right? You're still going to be, by and large, confronted with the realities of the Black community, right? With the things that have taken place with the demolition, right? Demolition of the Black community, right? From all of the injustice of American society. So, you start to realize that you've kind of bought into this thing and it's just not real. And I think we kind of mostly look at this in terms of materialism, right? Kanye West says, even if you still in the bins, then it's what? You know what I mean? Like you're still Black, we understand it from a material standpoint, but we don't understand it from a social standpoint. So, although everybody today is, benefiting socially, people are being exposed to these rooms, history, if you, like I said, if you're someone who studies history and you do the independent study, then you would know at the end of the day, even when you get there, it still ain't going to give that. But if you're someone who's kind of riding the fantasy and, you're kind of believing that at some point you are going to get some type of, equality or some type of acceptance, especially from the other side, then yeah, you're going to be met with opposition, and that's going to be troubling for a lot of people. And that's what we're seeing today. So there you have it, folks. At the end of the day, I want to leave you guys with the question. If you got this far to the end of the podcast, definitely comment below. Let's talk about morals and values. People are really trading their morals and values, but I think they're doing it in such a way that they're not even aware of. I think that's the thing that's most interesting about today is I think people were trading so many of those morals and values with very little awareness of what they were giving up, with very little awareness of what they were, trading in. And I think that's probably one of the most interesting things about moving fast in life. You just start making certain decisions. And I think you look up and you realize, like, what have I done? Did I really mean to do that? Right? But attention is a drug. White validation is a drug, especially in the minds of persons who have not been decolonized, right? Especially in the minds of people who don't have a sense of self, especially in the minds of people who don't have awareness or historical context in regards to African-American people and what we've gone through, So it's very easy to just kind of find yourself riding a wave. And then you look up and you realize that you've burned all your bridges. You've made some choices that are pretty altering. And that's not to say, I'm not talking about people who've made mistakes. I'm talking about people who are riding the wave, believing that they are going to get what white people have. Peace.